Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, our guest is Jimmy Nelson. Thanks for being on the show, Jimmy.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Jimmy's also known as Coach Jimmy. He's been a high performance business coach for over a decade. His unique skills at helping his clients to seamlessly connect their personal stories to their product or service, creating a strong know, like, and trust factor. And I know each of you that are listening, if you've been listening for very long, know that's so important in our business, those three things right there. But using his 20 plus years of experience as a stage and film performer, he created his own personal story to create a 7-figure business and now dedicates his life to helping professionals craft their own stories to attract and impact their lives of their ideal audiences. He is a sought after keynote speaker, MC and event host. Now, honing his expertise as a virtual MC as well. Coach Jimmy says, tell a story, change the world. So Jimmy, welcome to the show. I'm really looking forward to this. I've read a few books. It's been a while back, but about, just your storytelling a little bit, because it's so crucial, right? And just developing that relationship, people being able to connect with you. There's so many layers there to unpack, but I'm looking forward to just you helping us with that. The listener needs to know that it's so important. They're trying to build those investor relationships and that first communication that you have is so important. So get us started maybe a little bit with your background and let's dive into this piece that you're going to help us with.
Absolutely. Well, my story this whole thing started in first grade, Whitney. And I tell people that, and I always get kind of a funny look of like, so Jimmy, tell me about your business. And I'm like, it started in the first grade, because in the first grade, as a young, heavy set kid from a broken home in West Texas, my elementary school class was picked to do a Christmas musical number. And being the fat kid, we were doing a musical number called Too Fat for the Chimney. And it was how Santa Claus wasn't going to be able to come down the chimney because he was too fat for the chimney. And as the fat kid in my class, I just assumed, man, that's going to be my role. I'm finally going to have someone, the popular kids step back. I'm going to be Santa. Nope. They picked my best friend, Justin Martin, who is the skinniest kid in class. They wrapped some pillows around him, made him Santa Claus, and me, they put in like a onesie feety pajamas with like the drop bottom and the stocking cap. And they pushed me out to the edge of the stage and I had to sing a solo, Too Fat for the Chimney. But it was in that moment that I opened my mouth that I realized what I was supposed to do the rest of my life, because it was the first time I got a positive response from a peer group, from an audience. And really that's what started me on this trek of how do you put a message into the world to get an emotional response from your audience. And so that has sent me on a 20 plus year trek, highs and lows of being on network television, being on national tours and working at Disney and on Broadway shows, and helping people. How do you use something and entertain? What we take for granted every day as entertainment value can be a very, very powerful business tool, because I think your personal story is your number one marketing tool.
Nice. So I love how you just started with a story that we can all visualize. We can all remember that. Now we can connect Jimmy, standing at the front of the stage. I love that. So help us to be able to do that as well. The listener is trying to connect with that passive investor. They're trying to, build their investor base and they want to build their story. What should we be thinking about? How do we stand out and create that story?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because we want to lead with our stats. We want to lead why this is the best investment, right? Why this is going to, create this return. But it really is in a story that we're going to stand out in a really noisy market, because anytime we're trying to raise our hand or have somebody invest in us or choose us, well, it's not like we're the only option. And there was a stat in Stanford that says that people are 63% more likely to remember a story than they are just straight facts. And so what I really do with the people that I work with and the workshops that I teach is I'll sit down and find a personal story. For me, it's the first grade story, or it's stories that I share from my time in New York City that tie back to Jimmy. If I'm working with you as my storytelling coach, why you? Well, I'm going to go back and tell a story. And so sometimes those stories have to do with what your current profession is. But sometimes that story is about how you overcame something in the seventh grade. Maybe it was something challenging in your world, because if you think about it from an investor's perspective, sometimes it's not if there's going to be hiccups or bumps in the road through this process, it's when and if, right? And sometimes our job is to set an expectation. So if I can tell you a story about something in my world, either professionally or personally, that didn't go quite as planned, but I had the work ethic and I dug deep and I stuck with it and we came out okay on the other end, man, I want to align with you because I already know that you're somebody I kind of want to be in the foxhole with. If I'm going to invest my money into something and we're going to create this relationship, I want to know that you're with me thick and thin. And a story is a perfect way to do that.
Okay. So, story, it's like we all think about this like marketing plan, marketing tools, all right, but we don't always think about our story.
Not at all.
And so, help us, I guess, with that a little bit. This number one marketing tool that you're talking about now, or maybe some tips to just really develop our story.
Sure. I think the number one moment is I need to know your heart. I need to know your why. Because at the end of the day, we even the most analytical, tactile person, we're emotional decision makers. So if you can make me feel something to why I want to align with you, it's the reason you can't watch Braveheart and not ready to charge with him when he tells, and he's like, they can't take our freedom. There's a bit of that we need to be able to bring, even if it's the simplest little story. Again, people think that they need the 100-pound weight loss story, the 7-figure story, this huge emotional story. But sometimes it's in the little simple day-to-day stuff that's important. And so when I'm working with somebody, I always start with what their business is, but I'm like, why is this important to you? And sometimes we'll do a bit of a memory jogger and say, okay, well, has that always been important to you? How did you get into the business that you're in now? And we go steps back, and it never fails when there's some time like in high school or in college or something where there was a shift where I'm like, have you always done this? Like, oh no, I used to do this. And we'll just start, I just kind of go through a bit of a memory jogger with them. And sometimes we find the perfect little story that they're like, oh, I totally forgot about that one. Or I forgot that's where the pivot in my life happened. But it really is, I think, in a story, especially a personal story, we have to do 3 things. We have to be ordinary. You have to tell me why you're just like me. We have to be extraordinary. You got to show me something you figured out that maybe I need you to help me with. You're going to get me to the next step. So, for those investors that you're speaking to, why do you have a track record? What have you come through? And the third one is what I said before. You got to show me your heart. You got to show me your why. Why is this bigger than you? Why is this not just a business transaction? Why are you vested in this? And I feel like those are kind of the 3 things I look for in helping people pick that story to align with what they're offering.
Love that. And I'll, helping people to see the big turning points, find their story, find something they can, really draw out. And I'll share a little bit about something that has helped me. And I didn't plan it this way. I wish I'd had somebody like you from the beginning to help me to think through this. But, our big why, our big mission, most people listening knows, helping families fund adoptions. Our family's been very blessed by, just our 3 children that we, have been blessed. Our family's been blessed with through adoption. But the expense of adoption, can be 40 to 60 grand to get a child home. It is just insane, with 160 million orphans in the world, right? Most families who would be great parents, they can't even think about, where's 40 to 60 grand going to come from, right? And so that's our big why behind LifeBridge Capital. We now have the LifeBridge Foundation, where we hope to help those families. And so, but from the beginning, I started sharing that why, right? I would meet people at an event. I would share that why, share this is what's behind LifeBridge Capital, the LifeBridge Foundation. And obviously, and I didn't plan it that way. I didn't know this about storytelling, all this stuff, and however, that wasn't the plan, but I started to see people, really connect with me. Right. They could remember me. You talk to 200 people at an event on a weekend about real estate. Well, guess what? They could remember me, but if you're just talking about real estate, they don't remember who you are. Right. But they would remember our conversation. Because they can see it's something I'm passionate about. And it's something bigger that they can get behind.
Well, and I'm so glad you touched on that, because what I also think is so important that people don't realize is this story can be used in so many different ways. And you said it, if you're in a room full of people that are all in the same industry and somebody says, what do you do for a living? And if I said, I'm a speaking coach. Okay, great. Me and a gajillion other people. But I'm like, all right, when I was in the 1st grade, I tell this silly little story real quick. And I'm like, and that's what they're like, oh, they're going to remember like the little fat kid singing and why I did that, right? I stand out with that story. But where you can use that is, you sit down, we can map out a story, and it could be in a 60-minute keynote or in front of a bunch of investors. If you have a presentation, you could do it on a webinar. You could do, but then also in a room, you can tell the 3-minute, the 2-minute version of that story. So when you always hear about what's your elevator pitch, I say you can tell a 1-minute story that really is a great hook in there. It explains what you do and why. So when somebody says, so what do you do, or what are you looking for? You're like, okay, so when I was 21, and you tell this quick little anecdote to tie in what you do, it really does. It helps you stand out in a very noisy world, because you're the one person that had a personal story attached to it, as amongst everybody else that's just leading with their product, service. This is what we're looking for investors, and just lead with stats.
Love how you brought that out. It could be a 1-minute version. I feel like most of us don't feel like we're a speaker, or we don't have to develop that story unless we're going to be on a stage in front of, 200 people, right? But ultimately, you need that story even for that elevator talk, or that talk when you're speaking to someone in an elevator, right?
Absolutely.
So maybe you could provide some tips on that. We need to know our why. We need to need to really think about that story, right, and develop that. But how do we narrow that down to a 1-minute versus, say, a 45-minute talk?
Yeah, it really does take a little bit of practice, because sometimes we go through our stories, and that we do like, what details do we keep? Where do we go away? What do we keep, and what do we kind of edit? What gets on the editing room floor? And that's what I know. So I always want to flesh out the full story. And then if somebody's like, you have 1 minute to tell this, like so in my keynote, we had 60 minutes together, I tell a story about, in addition to the first grade story about me going to New York City, and a funny little anecdote about me being in Times Square having to pass out chocolates, and where a big epiphany moment was then. But if I'm like, okay, I know Whitney and I just have a few minutes today, I'm going to tell the abbreviated into this. So for me, it comes down to 4 parts. It's where I was, what I didn't like, what was the challenge, what did I figure out, what was the pivot, and why I'm excited about the future, or why can I help you do the same, or why do you need me to get to where you're going? So I'm just going to reiterate those real quick. Where I was, what's the problem? Because the biggest part of any of our stories is the vulnerability piece. It's the reason we watch Mission Impossible movies. If we popped open the movie and Tom Cruise beat the bad guy, already has the girl, and is like on the beach sipping a Mai Tai, like, that's a boring movie. It's the reason, like, when that opening scene where he's punched in the face and we're trying to figure out who the good guy and the bad guy is, we're intrigued. And people, a lot of times, the thing they want to hide from their story, it's the most powerful piece. It's the vulnerability piece. It's where you show me your wounds just a little bit, because then I relate with you. I think in society right now, in business, we're like, we need to look so polished and so perfect. And it really is the other way around. If you show me where there was a challenge, and then show me how you came through it, that stands out so much more than just, hey, I've always won, I'm winning all the time, all my investors are happy. Like, let me know how you got where you got.
Such great advice. It's hard to do that, right? You don't want to expose those things, when ultimately, I think we have to realize that everyone you're speaking to has some of those same issues, or are trying to work through some of the same things. Yeah.
And it goes back to that, like I said before, about ordinary, extraordinary, and show your why. I need to know why you can relate with me a little bit, why there's a bit of a risk. And if I'm investing my money, what does this money mean to me? Because if people's money means things to them more than just what the money is, or are we raising money to help adoptions and grow a family? That's a whole nother story. That's not about the money. That's about a family unit. That's a whole different story. And a lot of times, and really, it isn't about the money. It's, what does it represent? What's it going to allow us to do? What story is it going to allow us to tell as well? And if you can paint that picture for your investors of what life will be like on the other side of the investment, game over, because it's getting you thinking past today and where we're going to go as a partnership down the road.
Okay. So now we're learning to be vulnerable. We're thinking about, those bumps in the road, and you talked about like what I didn't like and a pivot point. Could you elaborate there?
Yeah. So I'm going to use my own like personal weight loss story. So again, I have a 100-pound weight loss story. So when I go in and I'm teaching into, let's say, fitness professionals, and we're talking about how to build that, I'm going to talk about where I was. I was a 3-time college dropout that was 100 pounds overweight. I had to move back in with my parents in my early 20s. man, I talk about this shift in this moment that I had in the mirror where I didn't respect the person in the mirror and I knew something had to change, and how that started me on a journey of over 10 years to take off that weight. And I start sharing what I found and the highs and the lows and the mistakes I made and the money and time that I invested. And then I'm going to turn around and say, hey, I'm going to take all this experience of what I had to learn, and I'm going to condense that for you. And I've already done all the hard work for you. So the same thing, if you can do that in any business, is you tell me, hey, this is kind of where I was. This is what I didn't like. Maybe you were in a previous business or a different career altogether. So, I have such a heart for people in the real estate world because my dad has been in it for 30 years, but he was a nuclear engineer. I watched him go from nuclear engineer to real estate professional, right? And that shift and the highs and lows that came with that. And so that pivot moment of, it's not necessarily everything changed there, but I think we all, if we look back at our lives, there was like an enough is enough moment, or the pain of this side became so great that the pain of changing actually became less, right? So we had to move. So I think it's those moments like that, Whitney, where, and like I said, sometimes there's these big, gigantic epiphany moments, like my mirror moment. And again, sometimes it's just those little things of like, do I want to live this way the rest of my life? Or I've got to change. Because so many times in our lives, for things to change, we have to change, right? And so
no doubt about
I think a lot of us have those moments as well.
I often talk about, I had to realize that I had to be the first person to change for my business, change any of those things. I want you to have a couple minutes though, to also speak to just the in-person component versus, Zoom, like so many of us are having to do so much of now, versus being on a stage. But so many of us are being on podcasts a lot more now, or doing a virtual meetup. How does that change our story, or does it, in person versus, webinar or electronically like this?
Absolutely. And so there are so many different, what I would consider stages to tell your story. It could be, face to face, when we all get to get back into rooms together again. But it could be a situation like this. So if you go back and listen to the beginning of this interview, when you asked, hey, tell me about your business. This happens all the time in podcasts. So Jimmy, tell me a little bit about your business. And I go, well, when I was in the first grade. So for me, instead of just answering your question, I'm going to tie it to a story. And I do that a lot. I have kind of a little tool belt of 4 or 5 stories that a lot of times I will answer people's questions about, well, what do you do with a story? And sometimes that's my story, but those can also be stories and testimonies of people I've worked with before. It doesn't, all these stories, being a story collector a bit, doesn't always have to just be our story. So if we're talking to a potential investor and they have a question or an objection, say, you know what? That reminds me of Sally. Sally was somebody we worked with. And then you go into that story as well. But it does change a little bit, specifically now that we are on like Zoom situations like this. And I always tell people the same way, if you and I were face to face or across, a Starbucks at coffee, and we're talking about potentially doing business together, I'm going to look you in the eye and I'm going to really share my heart and talk about why this is important to me. And where a mistake I do see now in this kind of camera situation is, I could be looking at you here on my screen, but it makes all the difference in the world if I make sure that I treat that camera the same way I do your eyeballs there. And it seems like this silly little thing, but I spent the other day critiquing and judging 400 2-minute stories, and people would have the best story, but they would just be looking over here, or you could tell on their phone when they were looking at themselves instead of the camera, and there's just a bit of a disconnect. So a storytelling tip I would give you, if you're looking for prospects and you're doing either a webinar or a one-on-one Zoom, it's so tempting to look at ourselves. It's so tempting to look at the other person on the screen, but especially in those really important moments, make sure you're looking straight into that camera the way you would somebody's eyes across the table.
Great advice. I try to work on that myself. I got 12 things happening at the same time, but so I do have to look off sometimes, but I agree. When we're looking, especially when you're in a big screen, you can tell who's paying attention typically and who's not, right? Great advice. Any other tips, or should the story change at all? Or is it like, it's going to be pretty similar to the same, depending on obviously the time length, but ultimately looking at the camera, making sure looks like we're making eye contact anyway. Anything else as far as, how we should present ourselves, just to tell that story on Zoom versus in person?
It takes practice. And what I find a lot of times is I'll sit down with somebody that I'm working at, a one-on-one client or in my workshops, and we map everything out, and they're like, okay. And I always tell people, I was like, the people that are going to win with this is the person that goes and messes it up first. Because applied knowledge And like learned knowledge and applied knowledge are two very different things. So I can tell you all day, we can map out your story and it sounds great in your head, but until you get it out of your head and into the universe and actually put it out there, that's where we're going to get more comfortable with this, because initially it is awkward. People look at me and say, Jimmy, this is easy for the, you had this was your profession and stuff. But what people don't know about me is I used to have actually a physical like leg twitch. I got so nervous in front of people back when I was starting my career in my early 20s. And it's something that it's just like working out. It's a muscle. You have to do this over and over again. And sometimes, and how can you do it maybe low stakes? So maybe that's just recording yourself on a video and then going back and honestly looking about, how did I sound? Did I get the point across? Was I looking at the camera? There's sometimes I just want to practice a new story or practice my story, and I'll go pop on Instagram Live. And so 2 or 3 people pop in. Great. If I mess it up, it's okay. But it kind of gets some of those nerves off. And I'm like, oh, I survived that. That was okay. And so it's high stakes practice in a low stakes arena. And so I just think getting that practice, and that's where you're going to find out where that groove is and what part. And again, you asked earlier, it's also going to let you know when you go back and go, oh, I'm rambling there. We can cut this piece. And when you actually look at yourself, it becomes super apparent, like what pieces to keep and what pieces to get rid of as well.
So recording yourself and watching it or listening to it, you're going to see where you're rambling. That's awesome. I love that you said that the person that's going to win or the people that's going to win are the people that are really willing to mess up first.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The great advice. Jimmy, what are a couple ways that you became so self-disciplined to really grow your business?
Wow, man, it's a passion project of mine. I talk about morning routine a whole lot. So, my background in, when I was, as an actor and then also, waiting tables and bartending and all the things actors do. I used to be quite the night owl and used to, I would never be doing an interview with you this early in the morning. And I got to start, once it was realized, like for things to change, I had to change, right? We touched on that a little bit earlier. So I started studying successful people and I just kept coming back to how did they start their day? How did they start their day? And so for me, who I was and where I was, both physically, mentally, and financially and in my business, I became so, I'll use the word disgusted with like, I got tired of living that way for 20 something years, almost until I was 29. I was almost 30 years old before I made this shift, and for me, it was, I don't want to be this version of me anymore. Can I rewrite my story? And that's the beautiful thing, Whitney, is no matter where we've come from, we can rewrite the next chapter. And so for me, now discipline and my routine in the morning and stuff doesn't seem like a chore to me anymore. It was hard initially. It stunk. But like anything else, we can create a new normal for what we are. It's like, how bad do we want where we want to go versus where we are, and which hurts worse? And sometimes, there's a great story that Les Brown tells about an old man sitting on a porch with his dog, and a kid walks by and the dog's sitting there moaning and groaning. And he was like, buddy, what's wrong with your dog? And he's like, oh, he's sitting on a nail. And the kid says, well, why doesn't he move? He's like, oh, it doesn't hurt enough to move. It just hurts enough to moan and groan. And I feel like that's where a lot of us are in life, is we wish things were different. Gosh, I wish I was a better storyteller. I wish I had a better pitch, I wish I could communicate with investors more. Okay, well, are you doing anything about it to change that? I see that people that are successful, those getting up at 5 a.m. and doing things. I'm just not a morning person. Guess what? Nobody's just a morning person. It's disciplines. Yes, it requires some work. Success is not going to accidentally fall in our lap. There's never been an accidental successful person. And I'm living proof that if you want to change bad enough, you can. If you just show up, I tell people, all I have on you is time and consistency. It became big enough for me to change what I was doing.
I could not agree with you more with, everything you just said. Incredible. Because it was me. I mean, as well, I had to realize I had to change. And when I started getting up early, consistently and taking control of that time, that's when so many things started to change. Are there a couple, I know you said you're big on your morning routine. Are there a couple habits that you're just so disciplined about, on a daily basis that have helped you achieve success?
Absolutely. So I tell people that my 100-pound weight loss and keeping it off for over a decade is not the biggest battle. It's the battle with my mind that I still fight every morning. And so one of my go-to, I guess I've coined this phrase is, I have to attack my mind before my mind attacks me when I say every morning, Whitney, I'm talking every morning. And so for me, the way I do that is, you always hear don't grab your phone in the morning, and I don't grab it to get on like traditional social media or check my inbox. But what I do is I go and I grab it and go to YouTube immediately and listen to some kind of motivational speak. I need something to speak life into me before those, like that monster in my head, start telling me all that negative, specifically right now. Right? Like this year, I'm so glad I had this discipline pre-2020, because I can see where people's emotions and depressions and stuff come in. So, when I pop on there, there's so many great things on YouTube, but a lot of times there's these compilation videos. So it's Les Brown, it's Jim Rohn, it's Gary Vaynerchuk, it's Tony Robbins, it's Mel Robbins, it's Brendan Burchard. It's pick your personal development, person that's your go-to. But I need somebody speaking life into me. I need to, if I'm going to be the best for the people in my life or the clients that I work with, I have to fill my bucket up first, or I got nothing to pour in anybody else. And so the mindset piece for me, and I also realized I could do it passively, because I also work out first thing in the morning. So I feel like if I get my mind moving, I get my body moving first thing, the rest of the day, it's already a success, and I'm moving. And so there was this hidden like 20, 30 minutes from when I first woke up in the morning to getting ready to go work out that, sometimes I put on ESPN or the news, or sometimes just being left with my own thoughts, which is equally as dangerous. So I was like, what can I focus on? What can fill me up passively? And so sometimes I'll turn that on and just sit it on. It's not me, and I'm not even watching it. It's the fact that I'm just passively listening to it, but it's made all the difference in the world on my outlook and my mindset. And as things, as challenges pop up, because it's not about what happens to us, it's how we react to it. And doing stuff like this, that kind of sets the sail in case a storm comes that day.
It's not what happens to us, but it's how we react to those things. Yeah, just incredible. And you have to attack your mind before your mind attacks you. Love that phrase. So important. What about the number one thing that's contributed to your success? And maybe we've talked about it, maybe we haven't.
It's consistency. It's patience and thinking long game. Being in business now for nearly 14 years, it was never just, hey, I'm going to try this, and if it doesn't work, it was like, look, I'm in. And really when that happens, it frees you up. We talked about earlier, like the people that are going to win with this, or they're going to be the first people to mess it up. Well, so many people don't have this long-term thing. They think, oh, that first time I try my story, if it doesn't work, my entire business is blown or whatever. And I don't look at it that way. If I'm like, I'm showing up every day for the next decade, regardless of what happens, then it allows me to make mistakes. And it's only in that freedom of trying and testing things do we grow, do we get to the next level. And so I really do think that if I look back over the past 13 years, it's consistency. It's just being willing to show up, good day, bad day, sleepy, whatever. It's just, okay, next day. You have to fall in love. When in my acting days, I had a mentor that really taught me to fall in love with the process over the performance. And it was showing up and figuring it out and tinkering with things. It wasn't just living for the time where I had an audience and there was a stage. It was falling kind of in love with the process and the grind. And I feel like if we can find something to really obsess about in the process of getting better, same thing with working out, right? It's like those quiet mornings in the gym where nobody's in there, cool. But if somebody, turns around, you get to holidays and people are like, hey, you look really good. The cousin that hasn't seen you in a while, and you finally get the pat on the back you've been looking for. You got that pat on the back, or you got that investor to say yes because of the practice and the things you were doing when there was nobody in front of you.
Jimmy, how do you like to give back?
Oh my gosh. I love to get involved in my community, whether it's in charity things, whether, me and my family, we have an organization here in Dallas called Brother Bills that I'm really looking forward to every Christmas, that we go and help put together packets for families in need here in the Dallas area. And I just love getting out and speaking and really delivering hope. In my health and fitness days, I used to tell people, we don't sell health and fitness. We deliver hope to a world that desperately needs it. And that really it's the way I look at it, whether that's financially or with my experience, or if I can just go speak life and hope into somebody else. And I just feel, again, now more than ever, do we need that? A word of encouragement goes so much further than we all think. And I challenge people that I work with all the time. I'm like, go, that person that just like flip through your mind today, just briefly, shoot them a voice memo. Just tell them, hey, I really appreciate this about you. It seems so silly, but if I get that from somebody, I light up like a Christmas tree, because just, and it's such a powerful way, because sometimes we think, oh, it has to be financial, or it has to be volunteering, or it has to be, sometimes a way to give back is just that person or that made a difference in your life that you haven't talked to maybe in years, and just saying, hey, I just wanted to let you know that you've made a big impact in my life. Thank you. Man, sometimes we all don't get that. We all get so in our silos, and sometimes, business or the entrepreneurial world or whatever can be a really lonely spot, right? We're grinding away in the office or doing whatever. So to get something like that from somebody, and they also say, if you need some encouragement, put back into the universe what you're hoping to get back, instead of saying, gosh, I wish people appreciated me more. I wish I had some encouragement, or I would love somebody to come pat me on the back. I just ask, cool, when's the last time you did that for somebody else? Because it's funny, you put it out there, it comes back as well.
Jimmy, I'm so grateful to have met you and just your willingness to give back to us today. Amazing show. You just laid out so many actionable things that we need to know about, and just being prepared to share our story, having a 1-minute version versus a 45-minute version, just showing our heart and our why, knowing that problem and what we like, where we pivoted, all those things that you just laid out, even whether it's in person or on Zoom virtually like this. Just grateful for your time. How can the listeners get in touch with you and learn more about you?
Absolutely. I've actually put together a story workbook that'll take you through some steps of what do you need to have in your story, and a bit of a memory jogger to help you maybe think about the stories that you haven't thought about. You just need to go to storywellcrafted.com, and you can get my entire workbook there. And anywhere on social media, you can find me at The Coach Jimmy.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.